All right. Somebody in the chat, shoot your shot. Let's shoot your AP Euro shot. How about that? All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to tonight's AP Euro review with Fiveable. Now, remember that as far as everything goes, I'm going to be here at 9 o'clock p.m. every Wednesday night between now and the end of April. Now, these are going to be free broadcasts, so join us every week. Now, also remember that there's Fiveable Plus. Go to fiveable.me and you can look into Fiveable Plus, which a great rate on that right now. So keep that in mind because that's going to include being able to watch replays, or let's say that you didn't session you want to watch at some other time. So that's there as well. But then there are going to be cram sessions. There are some of the cram sessions that I'm going to offer that will only be available in May to Fiveable Plus members. So go take a look at that. Now, one thing to note, it's going to be more expensive in May. So you want to make sure to get it now while it's cheaper because the demand's lower. You don't want to wait till April. Now, if you've already got Fiveable Plus, your teacher got it for you, you know who you are, then you've already got access to all of that. So just keep all of that in mind. And we're going to do some Q&A, and we'll talk about World War I. Now, remember, those of you who are here for the first time, what we need to remember is that, first of all, I've got my focus topic. World War I is tonight's focus topic, which means that questions about World War I get priority. There are some things about World War I that I'm going to make sure and cover, but that doesn't mean that I can't answer other questions, okay? So if there are some other questions, I'm happy to answer those, especially if they get upvoted. Now, remember, this not only allows you to ask questions, but also to upvote questions. So if you see a question that like, hey, I'd like to know the answer to that, give it an upvote. Now, remember, ladies and gentlemen, don't ask people in the chat to upvote your question. That's not something that, it's supposed to be market forces. Now, if you want to tell your schoolmates, hey, come on into Fiveable and upvote my question. If you've got a group chat going on or something like that, let them know we're over here, okay? So that's fine, but not in our official Fiveable chat. Don't ask people to upvote your question because we want this to be a natural process because we've got over 100 people in here right now, and we're at the point now, which is a good place to be, that we don't necessarily, like, we don't have, I can't answer every question, okay? So there's going to be some picking and choosing, but I'm certainly going to be going after the more popular questions, okay? So we're going to be focusing on World War I, and let's see what we've got here. Now, I've got something in particular on the causes of World War I, which is where we're going to start. So let's take a look at the questions and see where they are, and let's see. Oh, okay, so a dialog box is open. Let me just run into my PowerPoint real quick, and there's some kind of thing going on here. I just need to get in here, and okay, so now we're good. It's loading. All right, just waiting on my computer to catch up with me. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, take a look at the questions, upvote some things if you're looking into that. All right, so it looks like we are in business. Okay, so let's go into, first of all, the causes of World War I, and I'm sure somebody must have asked a question about that. So let's see what we've got here as far as questions. Okay, that's pulling up. Come on. All right. So, okay, now Emily's getting like right to the gist of it. So we will definitely get to the Treaty of Versailles. So Emily, oh, of course, Emily's always the question all-star, okay? Oh, looks like Tejas is there as well, okay? But as far as that goes, that when we think about the so-called main causes, okay, so Emily, one thing that I'm going to say here, and this doesn't even really come out in my video that's on YouTube, okay, this is something that I've really started to do more recently, and that's in terms of thinking of imperialism in a little bit bigger of a way, because when I was first teaching Euro, you typically think about imperialism and you're thinking about the imperialism, the scramble for Africa, imperialism in Asia, and I was like, really, that just didn't, it seemed kind of like a footnote. It was like, okay, militarism and the alliance system, all that, militarism, the alliance system, and nationalism, that all made sense. So what I think about anytime that I'm thinking in terms of imperialism, I'm also including continental imperialism. So as far as that, so as far as that, yes, ladies and gentlemen, remember, if we are disrupting the chat, we do have an intern in here who should be able to kick people, okay? Because the chat does, I mean, I want there to be a lively chat, but at the same time, it is, it's something that if somebody's disrupting the chat, we will kick that person out of the chat. So y'all keep that in mind. But as far as that goes, I think about continental imperialism. I specifically refer to it as continental imperialism because if we think about the Austrian Empire, for example, the Austrian Empire, which had no less than 10 ethnic groups. Now, I tended to discuss this. I think I discussed this in my YouTube lecture when I'm discussing, when I'm discussing nationalism. But the thing is, nationalism needs a certain, impetus in order to. Like, you look at the United States right now, like nationalism's not going to start a war here necessarily. Or you look at France or the Netherlands today, nationalism isn't starting wars between countries. Now, what nationalism can do is it can create a very hostile environment for people who are under the imperial rule of another European power. So when we think about, this is something that I sorted under nationalism, but here is the here are the ethnic groups in Austria-Hungary in 1910. There are no less than 10 different ethnic groups in Austria-Hungary, from the Germans, who, of course, the Austrians were German. They've got Germans, Hungarians, Czechs, Slovaks, Poles, Ukrainians, Slovenes, Croats, Romanians, Italians. And so many people packed into this empire. Now, also remember that the German Empire, if we think about this, that the Franco-Prussian War finally produced the German Empire, and the Germans took Alsace-Lorraine. Now, they also subjected the French to humiliation by declaring their empire at the Hall of Mirrors in Versailles, and they also got France to pay reparations. And so we see here that German unification is something that is causing something as well. So when I think about imperialism, I'm thinking a little bit bigger into, as I said, what I call continental imperialism, and not just imperialism around the world. All right, so as far as that goes, let me get that question marked. And okay, do I have any tips on writing a DBQ? In fact, I've got a 3-part video on YouTube. So go ahead and check out that 3-part video if you just type in AP Euro DBQ onto YouTube. YouTube search is a wonderful thing. And as far as that goes, go look at the video. And then I've got the 8-month writing clinic. Thank you, Maddie, making sure I stay hydrated. And as far as that goes, look at that video. If that's not enough for you, subscribe to my 8-month writing clinic where I go even more in depth. Okay, so yes, that is out there. All right, so as far as that goes, let's see, Tejas, all right. So what caused the outbreak of the First World War? Now, of course, when it comes to really any war, you're looking at several things that are coming together to create something. And as we go into, let's see, so we're going to, my screen is sharing now. It's sharing, it's getting there. Come on, come on, come on. All right. So what caused the outbreak of the First World War? Now, typically that is attributed to the so-called main causes, okay, the main causes of World War I. Whereas, now, of course, this is militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism. Now, as far as militarism, now here's the thing. When we are thinking about doing like a DBQ or LEQ or something like that, especially when we're framing an LEQ, we want to, when we're arranging evidence, we've got a big category of evidence here. So when we think about militarism as a cause of World War I, you are arguing that militarism is a cause of World War I, but then you also want to quantify this a bit, okay? You want to give specific evidence. Okay, okay, looks like I have to, okay. So thank you very much, Fiveable, for letting me know I have to actually kick people out of these sessions if that is a thing. So as far as that goes, yeah, so just make sure y'all keep the chat clean because I'll look at it once in a while. But militarism, okay, so what is militarism? Now, first of all, we want to put into that the Anglo-German arms race, okay? And what starts that? See, the more specific we can get, the better, because we don't want to just mention the Anglo-German arms race, but when we really get specific and talk about the HMS dreadnought. Okay, on my World War I video, I think I put some audio effects on that. I was feeling really, really inspired by the dreadnought and all kinds of Royal Navy ship names. But the thing is about the HMS Dreadnought is the Dreadnought class battleship was so far superior to any other battleship that it just basically leveled the playing field. That now we don't need to have a big old navy. So if Germany wants to compete with Britain, they don't need to just have more battleships. They just need to have more dreadnoughts. And so the dreadnought starts this arms race between Britain and Germany. And so as far as that, one of many great names for those ships, but the dreadnought had 12-inch guns, which means that these shells are a foot wide. All right. So, I mean, these are packing a big punch. And also that remember that World War I is a creature of the Second Industrial Revolution. You could even say something about that as a cause of World War I. Remember that you're not restricted to main causes. Anything will work as long as it's historically defensible, which means that if there's something that is logical and can be supported by evidence, then you're good. Okay, so a fully automated system here. So a very, very much in the Second Industrial Revolution. And so speaking of the Second Industrial Revolution, one thing we want to note here is that the United States, by this time, by 1913, the United States is the largest, really eclipsing both Germany and the UK together in terms of manufacturing production. The United States has gone from second to first. Now, notice that by the time World War I starts, the UK has actually gone into third place, and France is a distant fourth. So you can see a couple of things here. First of all, how is it that Germany is able to fight against the UK, France, and Russia all at one time? Lots of industrial capacity. Now, also, why is it that the United States getting involved in the war on the side of the Entente powers is such a big deal? And that's, you can see here, with the industrial capacity of the United States, when this war was at a standstill, at a stalemate, then the United States kind of pushes Germany toward the armistice. Now, not a surrender so much as agreeing to the armistice. And, then there are some other things here like Kaiser Wilhelm II, the British called him Kaiser Bill. He's the guy that fired Bismarck. Okay. There are a lot of problems with this guy. And one of the things that he wanted to do an interview. He thought that was going to help things and didn't help things so much. Okay. So now Franco-German tensions going all the way back to the Franco-Prussian War. So the next part of this now, alliances. Okay, so when we think about the alliance system, now Bismarck was the architect of the alliance system. And by that, what did he mean to do? So he built this system of alliances where you had the Central Powers at that time, or the Triple Alliance, which was a little bit different than that. But then you've got the, we typically call them the Central Powers, but also the Triple Entente. Now, Entente is a French word meaning understanding, E-N-T-E-N-T-E. And so France, the United Kingdom, and Russia, they are in the Triple Entente together. Okay, so that's, make sure you understand that you've got the Triple Entente and the Central Powers. Now, what happens is Italy, once the war starts, Italy switches sides. They were originally on the side of Germany and Austria, and so Italy leaves, and then the Central Powers are joined by the Ottoman Empire, the sick man of Europe, if you will. And so with that, ladies and gentlemen, the objective. Now, here's the thing, that a lot of times the alliance system is a factor leading to World War I, but remember that alliances are typically put together in order to promote peace. The United States is part of NATO right now, which on one hand, you think, oh my goodness, do we really want to go to war if Latvia gets attacked? But the thing is that Latvia probably will never get attacked, because if anybody attacks Latvia, they know that the United States is going to declare war on them. So when it comes down to it, in a lot of cases, the alliance system has actually been a good thing for peace. It's not like, we came to the conclusion that the alliance system was bad because of World War I and we don't need any alliances anymore. This is really one of those things where, it worked. As far as that goes, the alliance system worked until it didn't. Okay. And that's the thing. As far as that goes, it works until it doesn't. Now, imperialism, which, you've got national rivalries going global at this point, which for me, if there's a connection with the global imperialism, I'm not sure about the strong connection here. And that's why, since I made that video a few years back, I tend to talk more about what I call continental imperialism, because when you look at, nationalism itself, like I said, doesn't really account for, everything, because French nationalism, the French have a nation state, basically. The Serbs had a nation state, but then some Serbs were also governed by Austria-Hungary. So when you think about so many people in Europe that were living under foreign dominance, okay? So as far as that goes, self-determination on the basis of ethnicity, that is nationalism. Now, after the war, you'll see in the 14 points, you will see that Woodrow Wilson is talking about, self-determination of peoples. So when we get to the 14 points, then what we're going to see there is really that everything is geared toward going after one of these things here. So as far as that goes, when we look at the Balkan Peninsula, now you've got two geographical areas in Europe that sound kind of similar to each other: the Balkan Peninsula and the Baltic states. Okay, the Baltic states are Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. So as far as that goes, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania are the Baltic states. But then the Balkans, those are, that is basically the peninsula where you see Greece and Romania and, and those countries around there. Well, actually, Romania is there. Bulgaria is there between Romania and, sometimes my Balkan geography is a little bit off. And then, of course, there's the former Yugoslavia. Now, this is where we're getting into, like, as far as, now, this is today. And this is kind of part of one of the problems that's created by World War I and the Versailles Treaty, is that what's a Yugoslav? There's really not any such thing as a Yugoslav, but they create this country, Yugoslavia, with a bunch of people who can't stand each other, and that's since been been taken care of. Now the thing is, while Ms. Snyder had a good time over there a few years back. And I hear it's very, very beautiful over there. If you look at what's going on here, that waterfalls, trees, in my video, now this is something that you going to keep in mind, because for the first few years I was recording videos, I wasn't thinking that people were going to watch them that were actually in Europe and lived in these places. So I went on this long thing about how the people in the former Yugoslavia like to kill each other, and I offended some people. I didn't mean to. Okay, I'm sorry about that. But people who are Serbs and Croatians, they were just like, well, we're not. These are safe places. Like, they're great places for tourists to go. And so as far as that goes, in the early 1990s, right after the fall of communism, this wasn't a great place to be. Now, Pan-Slavism, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, so as far as that goes, Pan-Slavism. Now, of course, when we think about Slavic peoples, okay, so when we think about Slavic peoples, we're thinking we've got this strip there in the Balkans, and then, of course, maybe Poland, Czechs, and Slovaks, Ukrainians, Belarusians, and Russians. When we're talking about Slavic peoples, okay, so as far as that's concerned, Pan-Slavism is this idea that that is our ethnic group. So even if we're not all in one country together, that there is a certain there's just kind of a certain kinship among Slavic peoples. Now, the Serbs, okay, so they are part of this Slavic kind of network here. So as far as that goes, the Serbs, you've got Serbs here that are in Serbia that are outside of the Austrian Empire, but then there are also Serbs here in what is here labeled as Bosnia, and they're living under the dominance of the Ottoman Empire. And so the Black Hand, now remember, you could say Serbian nationalist, but the Black Hand, I think, is, it's more specific. So the more specific you can be on an LEQ, the better, okay? So this was a group of Serbian nationalists that, of course, they were Slavic, and they didn't want the domination of their own people by this German Empire, okay? So Archduke Franz Ferdinand, who was the heir to the throne of Austria-Hungary, went to Sarajevo, which I don't understand why he goes to Sarajevo. Now, this is another thing. The more specific you can remember this, the better on an LEQ. But he goes to Sarajevo, which, probably not the smartest place for him to go and he rides in a convertible. Like, this is more like, this has hubris written all over it. Like, let's send the heir to the throne to this city that's got a lot of, nationalists in it, where he's not that popular, and we're going to ride him around in a convertible where somebody can just basically walk up and shoot him. All right, so then he's assassinated. They've kept his clothing. Okay, now the assassination kind of ignites this whole thing. Now, whenever we're fighting wars, there is an immediate cause. Okay, so as far as that goes, the assassination itself wouldn't have necessarily caused a problem, except for, you see, where Russia has kind of taken on Serbia as a protectorate. They're promising to help them, and then Austria-Hungary then has Germany as their allies. And so what happens here is just a mess, almost like one of the things I always like to do in my class is to look at some of these bench clearing things on MLB. You can go to YouTube, and Major League Baseball has its own YouTube channel, and they basically put every fight onto these things. So it really just clears out like that. And so you've got the assassination, which is kind of the immediate cause, but then you go into like some of these underlying causes. The people who did the assassination were nationalists. They were against this, this Continental Imperialism, so to speak. And then the alliance system kicks in, and then you've got all these nations that are ready for war at the same time because they've been building up their militaries. So as far as that goes, all of these things are kind of working together for that. All right, so as far as that goes, all right, Emily is still rocking it. Okay, let me see. There is a quick question here. As far as, and we'll be talking about the Russian Revolution pretty soon. It might be next week's topic, in fact. How did the Russo-Japanese War impact the Russian Revolution? Now, when we're talking about the Russian Revolution, we've got to keep in mind that there are actually 3 Russian revolutions, okay? There's the 1905 revolution, which is the revolution where Nicholas consents to a constitutional monarchy, okay? Jillian, it is, and it's also on my YouTube channel. That's going to be the best place to find that. I've got a live lecture on my YouTube channel with that. So as far as that goes, the Russian Revolution, there are 3 of them. So the first one is the 1905 revolution, and that's where Nicholas II, he doesn't abdicate, but he becomes a constitutional monarch, that he allows the convention of a state Duma, not necessarily a strong state Duma, but a state Duma nonetheless. Now, you also had Bloody Sunday in 1905, so that was something where you had all these protesters, the Russian military just opens fire, kills a bunch of them. So the Russo-Japanese War, I would say that wars always cost money, and losing a war is very humiliating. Okay, so I mean, it's not only when you lose a war, and especially when you become the first European power to lose a war to an Asian power in modern history, then you've got the embarrassment of that, and also of because remember, this is a time when scientific racism was still dominant, and Europeans were supposed to be superior, and all of a sudden they just got whipped by the Japanese. And so you've got the finances of the war, then you've got the humiliation, and then Bloody Sunday on top of that. And so the 1905 revolution, I think definitely looking at the loss in the Russo-Japanese War as a causal factor would be a good thing. Okay, yes, yes, Stalin. Okay, that is definitely the Russian way to do these things, isn't it? All right, so as far as that goes, let's see. Now, what role did technology play in World War I? So a few things about technology in particular. Now, I've got a video lecture on the Second Industrial Revolution, but a good way to remember the Second Industrial Revolution is to put it in the context of World War I, because World War I represents the ultimate maturity of the Second Industrial Revolution. So all of these things that have been that have come of age at this time they're ready for World War I. So let's just go over just a quick thing. I'm going to pull up my Second Industrial Revolution graphic organizer here, because I think that it's one of the most important things for y'all to remember is the first versus the Second Industrial Revolution. So let's go ahead and just take a quick look, remind ourselves about the Second Industrial Revolution. All right, where are we? Okay. So as far as that goes, let's see. I'm going to close that. All right. So the Second Industrial Revolution, we're looking at 1850 to 1914. Now, 1914, of course, the start of World War I. Increased automation, we see the mass production of steel, and that's, of course, where you see like the, you've got metal, steel battleships and all that kind of stuff. And then petroleum. Okay. So now, one thing about World War I, some of y'all have seen the movie War Horse or read the book. I remember when I read this book, it's kind of a funny story. I read this book when I was in elementary school about this horse that was in World War I. And for years I was like, what was that book called? I mean, it was about this horse, and the horse had a marking on it, and it was really cool because it was told from the point of view of the horse. And then all of a sudden I see this movie coming out. It's like, oh, the name of the book, it was called War Horse. Okay. Like, I mean, I should have been able to remember that, right? But as far as that goes, petroleum. So you've got tanks, you've got large trucks, you've got artillery pieces that are designed to be moved not by horses, but by mobilized vehicles. Now, it doesn't mean that horses aren't still being used and that we don't still have some of these old, ways of carrying things around, but you're starting to see like petroleum and internal combustion engines in the United States, and I'm sure it's other places as well. The Ford Motor Company, for example, their automobile factory was converted to war production. So we see railroads, we see also chemicals. All right. Now, remember that things like the telegraph and railroads, those were a big deal in the wars of German unification. The Germans really knew, like the Prussians mastered these new technologies. And so as far as that goes, when we look at chemicals, okay, so World War I was the only war, okay, the only war between countries, where poison gas was used. And so poison gas, of course, it's got some drawbacks, like if the wind goes wrong, it can go back on your own lines. But there's some poison gas, like mustard gas, that won't kill you. There's other gas, like chlorine gas, that you can smell it. I mean, when you get close to chlorine gas. Now, there's also phosgene gas, which this gas was completely like you could not smell it. And so that was, it was just like, oh my goodness. So anyway, as far as that goes, you want to remember that. Now, also the machine gun. Okay. So when we look at the machine gun in World War I think this is very important because this is something that represents like this offensive technology that's just like, and so, you've got basically a choice to dig a trench or get mowed down, okay, by a machine gun. And so this leads to this stalemate, this trench warfare, because people can't be exposed because the offensive technologies are so far superior. Now, of course, that's where the tanks come in later on, because it's like, well, we need to develop a technology that can move troops and, that can go toe-to-toe with these machine guns. So those are a few technological things. Now, of course, it's also the first war to have, to have airplanes. So Wilbur and Orville Wright were just around about 10 years before World War I, they were playing around. So as far as that goes, then they're like, hey, we can use that in war. Now, actually, one thing about the tanks that I found out fairly recently, I think it's on Netflix, there's a documentary about tanks, and it was awesome. Okay, so just take a look at that. Remember, use your Netflix time for AP Euro, whatever you can. There's a documentary on Hitler and the Nazis. And so as far as that, tanks, at that time, the first tanks that came out, they didn't make them bulletproof on the sides. And so by the time they got close, where the machine gun, a lot of that fire is like, you think about all the angles and everything, they were going into the sides of the tanks, okay? So that's another thing that's going on there. All right, and it looks like we've got a great crowd tonight. So glad to see everybody coming out here. All right, so then as far as that goes, now, the Russian Revolution as it's going into World War I, okay? Now, a couple of things here. That first of all, the Russian Revolution, now the Russians were, having a hard time anyway of fighting the war. It's like the war is really breaking Russia. But once the Bolsheviks take over and start the Soviet Union, what happens here is that Lenin and Stalin, they're like, we're going to get out. So they signed the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. All right. So Russia is then out of the war, and Germany now has a one front war to fight. So Russia being taken out, the Soviet Union, and they yield a bunch of territory to the Germans, and now the Germans have a one front war. Now here's where the United States comes in, because Germany fighting just France and Britain, without having to deal with a second front, they're in a good position at that time. But the United States, now this is not something I've really verified per se, but it makes sense that once Russia got out of the war, then that's actually giving the United States more of an opportunity to get in, because remember that Woodrow Wilson said we need to make the world safe for democracy. And so as far as that goes, we need to make the world safe for democracy. If you're fighting on the side of the Russian autocracy, that doesn't really sound like it. But if you're fighting on the side of Britain and France against Germany and Austria-Hungary and the Ottoman Empire, then what Woodrow Wilson's saying makes a lot of sense, that we are fighting on the democratic side. And so that's something that I think that, it makes sense to me, even though I haven't looked deeply into that. The whole thing that Russia getting out made it easier for the United States to get in. Now, if the United States had not gotten in, then, we might have seen a different situation there, and, have seen a whole different kind of thing happen in Europe. That would have been very interesting. All right. So as far as that goes, ladies and gentlemen, all right. So the leaders of each country. All right. So as far as this, Lucia, I would say that we're really, we don't need, if you know Clemenceau and Lloyd George, that's great. I think that's great, but I don't think it's necessary. Now, Woodrow Wilson, I think, would be a good one because of the 14 points. Okay, so Woodrow Wilson, President of the United States, and this also marks the entry of the United States onto the world stage. And so, as far as that's concerned, I think we need to think about that as well. And so, how in depth do students need? Yeah. So as far as that goes, let's say Woodrow Wilson. If they know Lloyd George and Clemenceau, then great. But I don't think that that's necessary. I think it's much more important to know the policies of France, and that basically Woodrow Wilson's coming in looking for a peace without victory, and France is like, what are we going to do to punish Germany? Okay, so they want to make sure that Germany is going to get paid back for what they did to France in the Franco-Prussian War. And so I would not get too much into personalities necessarily, as far as just for passing the exam. All right. So as far as that goes, okay, what strides in military technology? Okay, so we've gone over this just a little bit. Wow, we've got 45 questions waiting here. Remember, if you have something that you want to upvote, go through the questions, because I'm certainly not going to be able to answer 45 questions in about 27 minutes. Okay, so as far as modern, that goes right back into that whole Second Industrial Revolution. Now, also with World War I being a modern war, is also the total war element, that they're bringing in women, and they're bringing in women in the munitions factories. Everybody is helping out. If you're an older man, you'll buy war bonds, and all of that stuff. Of course, the propaganda campaigns where we are making people hate the enemy. That's something that is, of course, modern. So I think part of it's the technology, like the machine gun, the airplanes, the Zeppelins, and the artillery pieces, but also really this whole total war thing, that this is going to be something the entire population is involved in the war, which is something we see in the world wars more than we really see at any other time. All right. Let's see. Now this, Sonia, we went into that a bit in the U.S. history. Now the U.S. history questions, I've already answered those in another thing. So just keep that in mind. What are the great powers at this point? Now the great powers before World War I, you're still looking at, you're looking at Britain, France, Germany, Austria, and Russia. And of course, you could include the Ottoman Empire if you want. But as far as that goes, it's really the same great powers as the Congress of Vienna. I guess we could also count Italy as well. But as far as that goes, it's imagine, Italian and German unification have happened. And it's really, before that, it's the case. Now, note, I mean, I love my Austria shirt, okay, but you know, I love the Austrian eagle. Now, Austria is a great country. They've actually got one of the highest per capita GDPs in Europe, but nobody really talks about Austria as like a great power. Austria doesn't have a seat on the UN Security Council, so I think that the world wars definitely make a difference there in the in the balance of power. Now, of course, today, while Germany may not have a seat on the UN Security Council, they've definitely got a lot of international clout. But now also we need to add the United States. Okay, the United States has taken a position thanks to the Second Industrial Revolution and the rapid industrialization of the United States in the decades surrounding the early, the late 19th, early 20th century. So that's another thing to take into account. All right. So as far as that goes, it's certainly an option, Emily. Now, these are typically content driven, but I think that having a cram session associated with that might not be a bad idea. But then again, I also have the videos up for that. So really, I don't know if this format is really as much like geared toward that as far as the whole Q&A end. But I think that the videos that I've got online definitely hit that. Even though I think when we think about our cram sessions, then maybe we should think about one of those being geared toward test taking or something like that. I certainly have nothing against that, but I think that does sound like to me something that's probably like a more of a Fiveable plus thing. Yes. Okay. So as far as that, how did Western imperialism change after 1880? Okay, so as far as that goes, you've got several things going on there, but you've got all of the technologies that are happening there now. Quinine, of course, comes out now. Europeans can go into Africa, not worry about getting malaria. Also, remember the Berlin Conference. Okay, is something that often comes up. The Berlin Conference was in 1884, 1885, and what they were trying to do was basically, and that's the thing about Bismarck. Everything that Bismarck's trying to do is something to try to promote peace, try to keep European powers from fighting against each other. That's except for the wars that he needs to fight to unify Germany. So as far as that goes, let's see. Okay, it's taking me a second, but anyway, the Berlin Conference. Okay, so the Congo Conference, West Africa Conference, and what they were trying to do was to as far as that goes, they're trying to get all the European countries to kind of come up with a system for the orderly settlement of Africa. So as far as that goes, that's one of the things that you might want to note there. But the whole scramble for Africa kind of kicks in around 1880. And part of that, of course, is the development of technologies. We've already gone over imperialism, but, we've got that. All right. So lead to revolution in Russia, and what was its outcome? Okay, so the thing is, we need to go ahead and start getting into the Treaty of Versailles. Okay, but let me answer this one here that Tejas has given us. In what ways did the war transform life on the home front? Okay, now that the home front, of course, one of the things is what we want to remember is the women working in the munitions factories, and there is a direct causal relationship between World War I and women's suffrage. Now, Emmeline Pankhurst. Okay, now that's another name that's great to remember when you're talking about suffragettes. Emmeline Pankhurst. Okay, now she was somebody who was a very prominent suffragette, but women were asking for the vote for decades. But it was finally World War I where women were expected to take part in this like total war movement, and it's really undermining Victorian gender roles for women, because women during the Victorian era. Now remember that it's not like women have always, like from cave people, just stayed home and cooked and cleaned. That's something that a lot of people have trouble kind of understanding. When I had to grade a women question one year, it was, people's answers were just terrible. They didn't take into account that in agricultural societies, women work alongside men. There was a guy, Bruegel, that was a painter around the time of the Reformation or so. And Bruegel, you can see like agricultural scenes where there are men and women working out in the fields together. Now, when it came to the Industrial Revolution, women worked in factories. And so it was during the Victorian era that you have this, this unrivaled prosperity in European history. And so from there, you get into that, now a man can afford to, a lot of men, especially middle class men, could afford a family on one single income. And so the woman's supposed to be home and be the angel of the house and all of that. So in that kind of context, women aren't going to be voters. They're not in the public sphere. But when it came to World War I, total war definitely made a difference there. All right. So as far as that, yes, yes, I do have recommendations for answering multiple choice stimulus questions. If you look up the Ritchie doctrine, you can see my sheet that I've given out. Basically, if you want that, let me go ahead and put a link there. You can Google the Ritchie doctrine. And I always give live sessions, like premium live sessions before the exam. So just look out for that. There will be some things coming out there. And so, but this is free. This is on the internet for free, but I go through and model the method. But I've got a method of answering these questions that a lot of people have found very helpful. All right. So going with that, we're going to get into what were the main points of the Treaty of Versailles. Now, first of all, let me go ahead and get the screen sharing again. All right. So as far as that goes, we want to go into the peace settlement. Okay. So let's see where we are. Let's see. It's going. All right, having a little trouble. I need to divide this PowerPoint up because this thing is just taking a long time to load. Sorry about that. All right. So like I said, now there's Emmeline Pankhurst getting arrested, okay, in 1914 at the outset of World War I. Now Germany and Austria, 1918, followed by Belgium, Czechoslovakia, United States, United Kingdom lagging behind a little bit in 1928. But within a decade of World War I, we see all of that is, that women are voting pretty much everywhere in the Western world. Now, I mentioned the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, okay, where that all of this land is being given up to Germany at that time. All right. So as far as that goes, let's go ahead. You've got the armistice on 11/11 at 11 a.m. Okay. So then we go into the Treaty of Versailles. Now, as far as that goes, that Woodrow Wilson, the President of the United States, is asking for peace here. Now, what they were doing, they were putting the 14 points in artillery pieces and shooting them at the Germans. They were flying them and dropping them as leaflets. And so Woodrow Wilson said, look, we want to have peace talks. Now, note here that, when you look at how bad the Germans got screwed by this, no peace talks until German troops leave France, Belgium, Russia. There were no troops in Germany at that time. And yet Germany was treated like somebody who was decisively defeated. Now, when Wilson puts the 14 points out there, he is each one of these. Now, I've only got 5 principles here of the 14 points. You can look and find some others, but you don't need any more besides these for the exam. And so he looks at some things that are happening that caused problems that brought the world to war. Now, first of all, we're looking at freedom of the seas because that's what got the United States involved in World War I, was Germany's policy of unrestricted submarine warfare. So freedom of the seas, that no matter who's at war, people should be able to, especially neutral nations should have a right to the seas. Reduction of arms, the Anglo-German arms race, okay, militarism, we want to get rid of that. We want to actually reduce arms and have agreements between nations as far as armaments. Open treaty negotiations. Now, you don't need to know details necessarily, but understand that there were treaties that were made before and during World War I that were not known. And it's one of those things that what's the use of making a treaty if nobody knows that you have a treaty with this country? And so that's one of the things that when treaties are made between countries, these treaties need to be public and they need to be negotiated openly. It shouldn't be behind closed doors. 4, self-determination of peoples. Okay, so when we look at what's going on in Germany, Austria-Hungary, and all of those places, which the Germans had very few, like they didn't really have non-Germans like in their empire, but they did take Alsace-Lorraine, and a lot of people there didn't want to be a part of Germany. and then the League of Nations. Now, what Wilson has in mind here is something that's a lot more formal than the concert system established by the Congress of Vienna. That Wilson wants an actual, I mean, the League of Nations had a building, a headquarters. The nations were officially represented. It's kind of like the UN, but just, you know, an earlier, less successful version. Not that I'm saying the UN's been wildly successful, but it's still here. And we haven't had a world war since then. Now, what Wilson wants is a peace without victory. And certainly the Treaty of Versailles starts off with the 14 points. Those are the first 14 articles of the Treaty of Versailles. But notice that Woodrow Wilson, when he gets to Europe, he becomes the first sitting U.S. president to visit Europe. And he's coming with these 14 points. But the thing is, the United States, when you look at how much skin they had in the game, when you look at France and Britain, that you're looking at 20 times as many people dying from those countries as the United States. So France is really out for blood here. That the Paris Peace Conference, Richard Hofstadter, an American historian, said the conference was an affair of three sides: the victors, the vanquished, and Wilson. Basically, that Wilson is kind of out of touch with what the Europeans want. That Wilson's thinking in terms of world peace, and Clemenceau, next to him, standing there from France, he wants Germany to pay. David Lloyd George, the British Prime Minister, said that I was seated between Jesus Christ and Napoleon. And so as far as that goes, Article 231 was the war guilt clause. Okay, so Article 231 of the treaty, now you can just say war guilt clause, but if you mention in an essay Article 231, that looks a lot more impressive. That's very, very specific. So Britain and France wanted Germany to claim responsibility for the war and pay reparations for the Allies. And so Germany takes responsibility, which, looking back on that, just kind of weird, isn't it, to blame Germany for that whole mess? But that's Article 231, and then you've got the 14 points, and they seem to be kind of at odds with each other. How do we get these two sides reconciled? And what they do in the Treaty of Versailles, and part of what makes it such a flawed treaty, is they end up doing both, okay? That they end up putting the 14 points in the treaty, but they also put all this war guilt and reparations stuff in there. And so as far as that goes, now also remember the self-determination of peoples. And what's going to happen here is that Austria-Hungary is going to be dismantled. Now also Germany is going to have to give Alsace-Lorraine back to France. Germany's got to give Alsace-Lorraine back to France. Let's see. Oh, oops. And then they've got to give, you know, some of, you know, whether it's Schleswig or Holstein, one of these back to Denmark. And then they've got to give land to Poland because Poland doesn't have a port. So Germany has to give land to Poland with a port. Now, this is, of course, going to be a problem with, you know, leading up to World War II, because what Hitler's going to say, and he's not wrong about this, is that, you know, there are Germans who are living under the dominion of other countries. And so, you know, he says at first that all I'm trying to do is self-determination of peoples. And so he's speaking the language of the 14 points when he starts his program of expansion. And so then you look at the Austrian Empire. Okay, so the Austrian Empire is like just broken up into a whole bunch of different you know, things here. So you've got Bulgaria, Romania, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia. You know, if you can tell me what a Yugoslav is, then we'll you know, then we'll have a good conversation about that. Okay, but as far as that goes, making all of these new ethnic nations in Eastern Europe. Now, this is kind of made possible by not only the surrender of Germany and Austria, but also where you see that the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, where the Russians gave all of this land to Germany, and now all of a sudden, like, well, we can parcel that into other nations because Germany's not going to keep that. And then finally, there is a demilitarized zone in the Rhineland. Okay, now that's one of the first things that Hitler's going to do later, is he's going to remilitarize the Rhineland. And then, as far as that goes, remember, after the Franco-Prussian War, the Prussians proclaimed the German Empire in the Hall of Mirrors. Well, where are we going to sign this treaty? We're going to sign this treaty in the Hall of Mirrors. We're going to sign the Treaty of Versailles, same place where the Germans proclaim their empire. And so then Hitler, when France surrenders in World War II, he has France sign the surrender in the same railroad car where Germany had signed the armistice. And so they keep going back and forth between France and Germany. Now, of course, the League of Nations was a failure, not necessarily just because the United States never joined it. I think it was just a failure, period. Because what happened when Japan starts aggressive warfare in Asia, the League doesn't do anything. They censure them, and then Japan just walks out. Nobody does anything. And then when Germany starts to remilitarize, the League doesn't really do anything. They don't really step in. Now, another thing here, now I'm going to go ahead and mark this question as answered, okay? But I do think that we need to discuss for just a little bit decolonization. Now, at least what we might call decolonization phase one, okay? So decolonization phase one. All right, because decolonization phase two is after World War II, okay? But what we might call decolonization phase one is going to be where you've got, basically anything that belonged to one of the defeated powers is going to be put under French and British control. Now, these are League of Nations mandates, okay? So what this is essentially if it's a German colony or, an odd part of the Ottoman Empire, what we're going to see here is that Britain and France are administering these colonies with the stated purpose that eventually they are going to give them their independence. Now, also the Balfour Declaration, which if we look at the Middle East, okay, so you see where the British have Palestine and Transjordan and Iraq, whereas the French have Syria and Lebanon. Now, the British did issue, you had the Balfour Declaration in the early 1920s that expressed, Britain's commitment to a Jewish state. Now, of course, that never seems to happen until after World War II. So as far as that goes, that's phase one of decolonization. Now, Britain and France don't give up any of their colonies, of course, okay? It's just the losers who are decolonized, and Britain and France are administering these colonies. So just note that you have the first wave of decolonization after World War I. Okay, so as far as that goes, let's go ahead and Tejas, in what ways was the Allied peace settlement flawed? Now, one of the things here is that when we look at the Congress of Vienna, it was set in terms of restoring the balance of power. So France, we want a strong France. Europe needs a strong France. And so France was just restored to its 1791 pre-Revolutionary Wars borders. Now, Germany, it wasn't the sense that we need a strong Germany for the balance of power. It was that a strong Germany has disrupted the balance of power, and we need to make Germany as weak as possible. So not only were they obliged to pay reparations, but Germany also was put in a situation where they couldn't have a military. So, which this is the thing to kind of put this into perspective. There are some people who say that Hitler took guns away from people. Not so. Like, the guns had already been taken away because the German government couldn't maintain enough of a military force. They were concerned about, what if the population rises up in a revolt? We don't even have the military to put that down. So they started to take up privately owned firearms. And now Hitler, actually, when he took over, he armed his own people. So it's like Nazis had guns and other people still didn't. But that was going on from there. But to put that in a perspective, that this was, their army was stripped down to a point that there wasn't even private ownership of firearms. And so as far as that goes, I think that when we look at it, was aimed at punishing someone rather than guaranteeing peace. Woodrow Wilson, even if it's just been the 14 points, he's maybe a little bit idealistic as well. But basically, a lot of people are upset. Italy didn't get some of the stuff that they'd been promised during the war that they thought they were going to get. And of course, you've got the fascism movement there. And so just a lot of these things are set up to where it's a combination of trying to do the right thing and then trying to punish the losers. And there's not really a coherent strategy like what we saw at the Congress of Vienna. All right, so from there, we've got, we'll be doing some interwar stuff pretty soon. So as far as that goes, let's see, massive migration, let's see, let's see, a lot of stuff here. All right. Okay, Cage, I'm going to answer this question because I think that this is interesting here, and I want to address it. Now, I've got a video that I've put on my channel recently about what I call historical judgments. All right, so we've got facts and opinions. All right, we usually think of things as facts or opinions, either true or it's not true. But what we don't take into account is a historical judgment. Okay, so when we're talking about the main causes of World War I, that different historians are going to have different weights on those causes. And one of the things you have to do when you do an LEQ, if you want to have, or a DBQ, if you want to have complex understanding, that if it's a multi-causal kind of DBQ, then, or an LEQ, that you have to think about in terms of what was the most important cause, not just these were the two causes, but how would you rank them? And when we look at the rubrics for the DBQ and the LEQ, it's about historical defensibility. Okay, it's not about whether it's true, but what can you argue with evidence? So when you're acting as a historian, Cage, what we want to think about in terms of, like, what do you think? And not just what do you think, your opinion or something like that, but here are the facts and how can we arrange these facts in order to make an argument? So that's what you're thinking about. It's not really my place to tell you which one of these things is the most, but for you to figure out, how can I make the best argument for this? All right. So as far as that goes, let's see. Yeah, of course, I can always do a shout out to Paul Stewie. Okay, always do a shout out to Paul Stewie. All right, so we're going to get to this later, but why not? We'll go ahead and mention the Beer Hall Putsch. Now, the Beer Hall Putsch was Hitler and the Nazis. It was their first time that they tried to get a hold on power. Okay, so in Germany, and it was a failure. That they thought that they had some local, like, police and military forces on their side, but they didn't. Glad that you're finding this helpful, Max. Tell your friends. And so the Beer Hall Putsch, I talk about that. I've got a video series on my YouTube channel on the rise of Hitler. So if you want to know that, now, of course, it gets a little weird with the searches because for some reason you can autocomplete Stalin, you can autocomplete Mao, you can autocomplete Pol Pot. Hitler will not autocomplete on Google. And it's just like, it's a bit frustrating for me as a teacher. So, when I tell you, like, the rise of Hitler, if you look that up, Rise of Hitler, Tom Ritchie, I've got a whole thing going from the Beer Hall Putsch and the beginning of the Nazi Party to the Nazi takeover of Germany. All right, so we've got that. Now, ladies and gentlemen, remember, okay, now Bloody Sunday in this context, you're thinking about the Russian Revolution in 1905. It's part of the 1905 revolution, and that's when a bunch of Tsarist troops opened fire on a group of protesters in St. Petersburg. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, make sure to check out Fiveable Plus. Okay, you want to make sure to check out Fiveable Plus because that's not only less expensive now than it will be in April and May, but it's going to give you access to replays. It's also going to give you access to the cram sessions that we do right before the exam, and those cram sessions are going to be good. Okay, now next week, join us for the Russian Revolution, I believe is our topic. Yep, the Russian Revolution is our topic next week. So you want to make sure to join us at 9 p.m. for that. And then we'll be doing this every Wednesday at 9 p.m. all the way to the AP exam. So I'm looking forward to seeing people. And, let's continue to get to know each other. Remember to go to fiveable.me if you want more information about Fiveable Plus and you don't have that service yet. All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, see y'all in a week, and we will get to talking about the Russian Revolution. It is always a pleasure. Yes, Jillian, you're very welcome. And yes, thank you. Thank y'all for coming. And I'll see y'all next week.